Okay. Well, first off, thank you everybody for coming. Welcome back to those of you that joined us for our first session 2 weeks ago, and welcome to those of you that are here for the first time. Um, Jaclyn and I spent quite a bit of time kind of recapping the first session together and thinking about the key takeaways that we got out of that first session, which was really focused on the new Dietrich School guidelines around UTAs and UTA programs. And so we thought we'd start today with just a little recap of some of those main takeaways and some of the outstanding questions that we had from participants during that workshop. And then we'll transition into our goal for today, which is really to focus in on recruitment and training with students currently registering for classes for the spring. We figured there would be faculty that are thinking about starting to recruit TAs for the spring or building their TA programming for the spring. So we want to make sure that we've got plenty of time to talk about strategies that we're using, but also give everyone an opportunity to talk about any concerns or questions that you have as you're developing UTA programs. Okay, so in terms of our recap from last session, we really wanted that session to be an opportunity for faculty from across the school, teaching in very different contexts, to exchange ideas about how they're using UTAs in the class. And we ended up having a really productive exchange of ideas, and we got some really great questions that were raised that got us thinking about how folks are using UTAs in the classroom. So in terms of the main takeaway for me was that a lot of faculty have very positive experiences working with undergraduates as UTAs. We heard a lot of faculty discussing sort of the benefits that the TAs get, the students in their class get, and also how rewarding it can be to work with a TA in this context, sort of outside of the classroom. And so when we talked about the benefits of a UTA program, we were able to sort of lump together benefits for the students that are TAing, the students in the class that has the TAs, as well as the faculty. And it became really apparent that the biggest box was the benefits for the UTAs themselves, right? In that the students that are participating in these UTA opportunities are gaining a lot of professional skills by teaching others, in addition to gaining content and skill mastery within the discipline, and then also this sort of self-confidence and belonging within their discipline that they can get from being in this role as a peer leader. And so really, when we think about these UTA programs, there are significant benefits for offering this opportunity to students. There are also benefits for the students in the class that a lot of faculty came up with when thinking about their own classes that they use UTAs in, right? Um, UTAs are a sort of approachable resource for a lot of students. They provide that sort of peer perspective on the course. They also help to enhance the student experience because they can change the dynamic of the classroom itself when you have UTAs that are engaging in activities and helping to engage students in those activities. And ultimately, all of that can lead to improved learning outcomes, right? So the TAs are benefiting, the students in the class are benefiting. And then we also heard about some of the benefits for faculty as well in terms of, our TAs giving us these really good insights about our students, right? That maybe the students wouldn't tell us themselves, but the TAs are observing and can give us that information about what the students are experiencing in the class that you might not expect. And then we heard quite a bit about the classroom dynamics and also, especially in large classes, the logistical help that faculty get from UTAs, right? Things like passing out paper. Um, we also talked quite extensively about the new UTA guidelines surrounding UTA's grading and how UTAs are now permitted to do non-discretionary grading. And really what I think we heard from across the school was that in some contexts that can be really helpful. So in really large classes where there is a lot of non-discretionary grading for UTAs to do, this can be a huge help in those contexts and allow for assessments that are, maybe a little bit more of a lift in terms of grading to be graded more easily if you have the undergraduate TAs helping. But in a lot of classes, particularly ones with essays or more subjective grading, the UTA grading doesn't really help because it cannot be non-discretionary. But regardless of how you're using UTAs, and with all the really creative things that people are using UTAs for, we did hear this similar sentiment echoed from multiple people that, there are huge benefits of having a UTA program, but it is work, right? That when we build a UTA program, it's not nothing, and it does require an input of thought, energy, time, and work. And so Jaclyn and I took away from this session that when we talk about uh, our UTA programs, right, we want to make sure that we're properly branding it, right? What are we really doing when we create and maintain an effective UTA program? So when thinking about how we talk about UTAs, right, we want to make sure that we're really thinking of it for what it actually is, right? It's experiential learning for our students. It's an opportunity that we as faculty are providing for students to get involved in their own educational experience and to help each other in that experience. And in order to build a program that's going to benefit our UTAs as much as possible, that requires us to have some foresight into a lot of the aspects of that program, right? How are we going to recruit students into our UTA programs? How are we going to schedule around everybody's busy schedules to make sure that the students that want this opportunity can participate in it? Training, right, at the beginning, right, what's the onboarding look like, but then also throughout the semester, how do you maintain your standards for your UTAs and make sure that they're being trained effectively within your discipline? Obviously, supervising them. We talked a bit about creating materials for students to use. And as the faculty member, it's really your responsibility to keep track of what materials your students are receiving. And so that requires supervision from the faculty member, keeping track of what the UTAs are generating and checking what they're generating to make sure that it's of high enough quality for your students. Monitoring progress of the UTAs. A lot of times these programs involve intentional professional development aspects where we are trying to help our students develop these professional skills, and that requires monitoring that progress, and in some cases setting specific goals, right, and figuring out how we're going to achieve those goals. And so just sort of all of this together had us thinking that, if you want to develop a UTA program that's going to be the most effective for your UTAs, your students, and yourself, it's going to require time, energy, and thought. And so this discussion in the last session really brought up some concerns from a lot of faculty regarding the workload associated with UTAs and sort of where that fits within workload policies. And so I wanted to get a little bit of clarity on this after last week's session, and was able to touch base with Adriana as well as Todd Reeser and sort of get a better sense of where UTAs fit within workload policies. And so if we look at the Dietrich School workload policy that's currently published, we'll see that UTAs are considered teaching, right? It's a teaching role, not a service role. And that, I think, makes a lot of sense in that our day-to-day work with UTAs is teaching, right? That's what we're doing. We're teaching our students in that new context. Now, that said, I think that there are some arguments for sort of some piece of what we're doing being allocated towards our service. And in that vein, I think that departments should be having this conversation as they build their own departmental workload policies that are then going to be sent for review by the dean's office. So I can share from Bio's perspective, right, the biology department has put together our draft workload policy, and we have UTAs listed under teaching as, something that primarily is benefiting our formal teaching responsibilities. But we've also worked into that draft policy a couple of ways in which UTAs may also be service. So in one way, it's through a departmental committee. It's a UTA oversight committee where individual faculty members are assigned to that committee, and they do things like generate training materials for the entire department, right? And so that is, service that's assigned at the departmental level. And if you are serving on that committee, you are doing work surrounding UTAs, but for the entire department, and that counts as service. And then we've also worked in a small amount of sort of elective departmental service for UTA training. So you have your UTA program, and what you're doing with them day to day is really teaching, but we're arguing that a couple percentage points of your elective UTA or elective service for your department may involve this consistent UTA training, and that percentage is based on how many courses you're teaching with UTAs. And so what I heard from Todd is that they're in the process of collecting and reviewing these departmental draft workload policies. And so he encouraged departments to be having this conversation. And if this is something that the department agrees on and works into that draft policy, then that will be reviewed at the dean's office as they are reviewing all of the workload policies and seeing sort of what different departments are doing in terms of that workload. And so it's definitely something to encourage as you are putting together those workload policies within your department. So I want to take a second now before I transition it over to Jaclyn and see if anybody has any questions, comments, concerns, or thoughts about sort of how your department is thinking about UTA programming, specifically around workload, or if there are any questions there that we can answer.
It looks like the chat is quiet today.
Yeah.
I mean, I can say in German, we do a teaching internship, and we do have an internship coordinator. So I think the coordination of the internships themselves is then service. But then the actual facilitation of the internship is then teaching. So we haven't yet submitted, I think, our workload policy, but I'm sure that's where we'll land.
Yeah. I think also thinking about it as teaching, I know for me at least, building a UTA program and incorporating that into my class was a big part of my promotion packages, right? Because it's innovative teaching to create
Mhm.
these programs. And so, my first couple of years of teaching, I was so heavily focused on the curricula for my courses. But then once my courses were off the ground and that work was done, then I had more teaching time to dedicate to something different, right? And so the UTAs came in as teaching effort later, and I was doing service in other
Mhm.
areas. So I think there's also a very personal part of this where depending on where you are in your career, you may have more teaching effort that you can allocate to developing a UTA program. But also, it is, in my opinion, an innovative way of teaching, right? Is teaching through UTAs using peer learners. And so I think there's an argument to be had for it being part of your teaching because it's, something that you can then use as evidence of good teaching or innovative teaching. Go ahead, John.
Thanks, Erica. And I wonder too if it's partly, I mean, you implied this departmental culture where, like in my department, which is history, UTA use is really fragmentary based on the instructor. Now, some use it every single time they teach a certain kind of class, right? For which the UTAs are really important for mentoring group work, for example, and things like that. And I suspect there are departments, and bio may be one of them, I don't know, where again, certain levels of class always have them basically as a kind of built-in thing. And I mean, one of the things I could imagine in the teaching versus service kind of binary would be the work you do with an individual UTA or a group of UTAs within your class. Absolutely, I agree, I think is teaching. But like one of the things that I always worry about in moments like this has to do with kind of like disciplinary and departmental consistency across colleagues who are doing this. And so I could imagine, for example, if you ran a seminar for faculty in your department using UTAs, that would actually be service, right? Even though you're effectively doing that in order to make the experience better at that individual level, you're doing it in a kind of service-oriented way with colleagues. And I probably would want to be involved in something like that in my own department as I start to use them, just to make sure kind of the departmental norms are generally being met, and I'm not doing anything as an outlier in any direction.
I really like that idea. This idea of establishing consistency, but also exchanging materials within departments, and probably folks in larger departments are doing that. Erica, are you already doing that? Wow, that's great.
Yeah, we do have a lot, and I think we'll get to that a little bit too more as we start talking about
Yeah,
training materials. I think that
sure.
I would say, we do have some things that are helpful across contexts within our department, but I don't know that there's as much collaboration going on that could be happening. Um, but yes, that's a really good point. I think that there are different ways to think about how individuals in departments may be serving the department by helping to coordinate UTA programs. I also want to emphasize too that, to me, well, I've heard from faculty who say, I tried UTAs and it was just so much work, it wasn't worth it for me, and so I don't use them anymore. And to me, that's such a disservice to the students because so many students want this opportunity, right? And so if, faculty are not using UTAs when they could be because it's simply too much work, is there a way that we can incorporate that extra workload as part of the workload policy so that faculty maybe are more encouraged to do it, because I think it does benefit our students in such important ways, that I want faculty to be encouraged to do it, even though, and acknowledging that yes, it is a lot of work to do it.
Absolutely. I mean, and I think too, one of those benefits for us that we see is that just that experience, right, not only helps them with grad school programs and applications down the road, but has helped a lot of our students get into Fulbrights and, or, those sorts of opportunities, sorts of teaching assistantships abroad or higher level national scholarships that, otherwise they aren't as qualified for as folks from other institutions who get that experience.
Right. Good. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and then transition this over to Jaclyn to talk about some of the questions from
Oh
last time.
yeah, Burhan. Yeah, exactly. Getting a letter of recommendation too is key because especially if you have larger classes. Amazing. Yeah. So this transitions us over to talking about these outstanding questions, as Erica pointed out. And a lot of these came up in the last session, so we just wanted to clarify a couple of these. And thank you to Adriana for giving us a lot of these answers. And we talked some of these out together as well. So number one, can UTAs enter grades on Canvas? The answer there is really no, not if the grades are correlated with student names. However, is it possible to anonymize student work in Canvas after some digging and not listening to AI because it didn't give me the answer? The answer is yes, thanks to my colleague Benjamin Brandt, who has used this feature before. Essentially, you can go to course settings, you click on the tab on the top right called feature options, and it gives you then the option to select or enable anonymous grading, and that is throughout your Canvas site. However, you need to make it anonymous for each assignment that you would like to have graded anonymously. So it just makes that option available in the assignment, and then you need to click that and make that possible for the graders. But it does work. I tried it out, and it's very exciting. Um, Three, can UTAs proctor makeup exams during office hours? No, I mean, this came up last time as well. Students should not be proctoring exams alone or in pairs. It just, it leaves them open to very difficult situations because imagine what if a student who's taking the exam is cheating? Are they that they're putting in a very compromised position? It's really difficult to put them in that position. Can UTAs develop classroom materials or activities and execute them in the classroom? The answer to that we discussed and decided was yes. According to some of the guidelines, they certainly can be developing classroom materials, but they shouldn't be required to. And that's on the next slide as well, that they shouldn't be required to do that. And also the development of those materials should be highly supervised. As Erica mentioned earlier, we don't want to be distributing materials to students with these inaccuracies or issues. We want the learning materials to be good. And then Number 5, can the new grading guidelines be used as a justification to increase course enrollments? And Adriana said absolutely no, more or less. The change to the UTA policy regarding grading is unrelated to other policies. That's a quote. That the emphasis of the UTA program is really, it really should be student-centered. It should be about student growth through mentoring, through this professionalization process. And that makes a lot of sense. So it should not be an opportunity to say, well, faculty have more help now, so they can do more grading and we can raise the course caps. That's not the purpose of the guidelines, this change. It really is to kind of reflect what was already happening as well. Yeah. Yeah. Questions, reactions to that? Oh, that's a good question, John. I'm not sure about that. Does a TA role necessarily involve access to names, etc.? I mean, I think that if they, I have to check this, but I think that if someone is enrolled as a TA, that anonymization can be very active and they won't see the names or have access to the grade book. But I have to check. There's certain levels of roles in there, but as you all know, but I have to confirm that.
Right. If they are in Canvas as TAs, they do have access to the grade book.
Oh, they
Now,
do.
I always have a discussion with my UTAs that they are not allowed to access the grade book. And as the instructor, you can see their clicks, right? You can see what your UTAs are viewing, their page views. So I tell them I can see if you've been in the grade book. And usually that's enough to scare them. And, that's part of the agreement on day one that you are not allowed to access the grade book. I've never used the anonymous grading feature though, but I believe the way that works is that if you're in SpeedGrader, the assignments come up and they're anonymized in SpeedGrader, so you're not in the gradebook at all, and then they populate the gradebook. And so again, as long as the TAs are not accessing the gradebook, they won't see grades.
Yeah, I mean, that's been consistent with my experience. We used to anonymize them also, just essays that we were reading, for folk tales. And yeah, it comes up anonymized via SpeedGrader, but then of course in the grade book, you have access to what those look like.
But I
Oh,
think to
sorry,
I
John.
think to that point, Erica, maybe two things we should think about. One is to actually float up the chain of command that if Pitt is able to make asks of Canvas, to have them consider making either a more customizable role where you would get to determine so that you didn't have to have that talk with the students and you didn't make it maybe forbidden fruit for them to look at the gradebook, to say that you could set the user role where they could see anonymized grading only, or but still be able, I think, implicit in Lisa's question, like give them design and some degree of control over maybe assignments of various sorts, but not be tempted to be in places they shouldn't, which to me sets up a much more kind of confrontational dynamic should someone decide to break the rules. But I also think it should be very clear on the FAQ if the TA role in Canvas gives access to the grade thing and a professor's not aware of that, then they'd have to anonymize the grades for sure. Um,
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think there are issues with the other roles in Canvas, like the designer role, and I think the observer, in that like they can't create announcements,
right,
right? And we want
right,
them to
Yeah.
be able to do that, but we
right,
don't want them
right.
to see the grade book. Um,
Mm.
and yeah, so I think that if we can customize our own role, that would be wonderful. Yeah.
I didn't know that was possible, but that's an amazing suggestion. Oh, designers can post announcements. Okay. Oh, a TA view, a designer view, observer
Yeah.
view. Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point, Jeff. Um, who do we talk to about that?
Yeah.
Who's
Maybe
our,
someone at CTL.
yeah.
I'll look into it.
Okay.
Well, I mean,
Excellent.
Canvas wants to remain our LMS, right? So the university would have a little juice at least to add its name if other places are starting to do this,
Hmm.
um, and
Mhm.
because they do want to keep the business.
True. Um, Continuing our discussion here, we wanted to get into our goals for session two, and we really want to try to share approaches for recruitment and training in this session. So for the rest of this session, and to that end, we wanted to discuss too, of course, the UTA guidelines, and what those look like for recruitment and training, at least initially here. So that Dietrich School students who are interested in undergraduate teaching experiences should, of course, be in good academic standing, have a good GPA of 3.0 or higher. They must have completed the course or a similar course, which makes sense, and have completed it with a B or higher. If they're, of course, supporting these sorts of active learning roles in class as well, they should be familiar with the material. And then that they should also expect to attend the lectures and or other class meetings, as well as training sessions, I would add there too. Um, and then other things, I think we've talked about this list already, but just to emphasize this point again, that faculty members who are working with UTAs must, again, have some knowledge of the students beyond the classroom. They should clearly articulate their expectations as well. So similar to what we already do in the classroom, but articulating the scale of the credit, whenever they're enrolling, is there a stipend involved? How many hours per week will this be? And students usually, I think, in my experience, ask this right off the bat, at least those who are concerned about managing their time properly. And then also, of course, establish open lines of communication with them so that they can ask questions if they have problems or are struggling with something. Or have a conflict of interest, as we mentioned before as well. And then it's also up to the faculty member to ensure that they receive appropriate training. And we can talk about what that could look like. And many of you also sounds like if you have very exciting training programs, I'm curious to hear about them. And that we should not require UTAs to prepare course material. So seems like it's contradictory to the last slide and some of the things that we said before, that they are permitted to create course materials with supervision, with guidance, but they shouldn't be required to do this. And I think it's also a way of, and maybe Adriana can correct me if I'm wrong here, a way of like preventing exploitation of students here too. Um, and that we should be reviewing regularly the kind of things that they would be teaching throughout the term, as well as meeting with them regularly, which is where a lot of the time commitment comes in, right? I think that we're spending a lot of time mentoring, meeting, and without that, I feel like there's a bit of a disconnect. So at least whenever I've worked with UTAs, I feel like that, at least once per week meeting, if not, sometimes it turns into twice per week, but shorter meetings of just checking in, things that they've noticed, issues that have come up, questions that they've gotten from students. It's such an important moment. So yeah, I don't know if anyone other has questions or experiences they want to share there. We can move forward.
Yeah,
Go
so
ahead. Sorry, go
um,
ahead.
no,
It's
you're
all
good.
you.
Yeah, so we wanted to sort of start with, these are the guidelines, but then really elaborate on those. So as the guidelines say, right, in terms of finding UTAs, according to the guidelines, it's really just we're looking for students that have, a certain GPA, that took our class, and who did well at it, right? And so for some of us, we get a ton of applications for UTAs, right? We have these robust programs. And so recruitment might not be an issue, but in other cases, maybe we want to find students to be UTAs, or we know of students who we think would be good UTAs or who would benefit from a UTA opportunity. And so we want to think about ways in which we are approaching recruitment. And then I think the other really important thing about recruitment is, your UTAs provide a way of increasing your students' sense of belonging in the classroom. And so it's really important to make sure that your UTA population matches the demographics of your students, right? So that students in the class see themselves represented among the UTAs in the class and see that, oh, I could be in a leadership role like that student also, versus if you're in a class and all of the UTAs don't look like you, it could be a signal that, oh, actually, I don't belong here and I could never get to that leadership role, right? And so not only should we be thinking recruitment in terms of finding those best students who did well in our courses, but also making sure that we are representative of the student population, both within our class and in our UTA group. So, I think one of the number one recruitment strategies that I use is to invite students to apply, right? So finding students in my class that I think would be good UTAs for various reasons. So for example, one of the most effective UTAs that I think I've ever had was a student who took Intro Bio 1 and failed, and then retook it with me and worked harder than any student I ever saw at my office hours twice a week, asking good questions, an amazing attitude, and ultimately passed the class with a B. And at the end of the semester, I emailed him and asked, do you want to apply to be a UTA? And his response was, well, I failed the class the first time, so I probably won't be good in that role. I don't think I should. I don't see myself doing that. And my response was, well, actually, you're going to be able to relate to struggling students in a way that a student that just gets A's without having to try very hard can't, right? So you bring something to the table that other students don't. And so I, convinced him to apply. He got the position and ended up TAing with me for 3 years, graduated, and then went off and is now in the process of applying to medical school, right? And, hearing back now, he constantly says, oh, UTAing was so important for me because it helped me gain that confidence. And he truly was a very good UTA, and students related to him really, really well. And so that, to me, is an example of a case where, you have a student who would not have applied if it was just up to students deciding that they wanted to, versus targeting a student saying, I think you would be good in this role. Why don't you apply, right? So I encourage folks to do that. And then as part of the guidelines, right, it says that you should know something about the student outside of just how they performed in your class, right? So I think it's very fair to request anybody who wants to be a UTA that they send you a copy of their resume or CV, their unofficial transcript, right? So in some cases, maybe you have a student who's doing really well in your course, but is maybe not doing well across the board. And so this helps you confirm that they're successful across the board and they have the time, energy, and space in their schedule to dedicate to UTAing. And then also their schedule, right? If you have a UTA who's taking 17 class credits and also doing research and has 10 extracurriculars, they may not have the time needed to dedicate to the program. And then getting to know the students a little bit more personally. In some cases, maybe these are students you've met through office hours, but maybe you have applicants who you don't know well. So I typically use an essay as a recruitment tool as part of my application. So I've shared my prompt here. Instead of sort of structured questions, I ask them to write an essay and I give them a handful of possible questions that they could answer within that response. And so I can get at characteristics of the TA personally outside of just, did you get an A in my class, right? Or did you do well in my class? And so I think the essays, or if you want to do interviews, something of that nature, helps us get at things outside of grades, like their motivation, their perseverance, communication skills, both reliability and availability, right? Do they have room, empathy, creativity, right? Those characteristics that are hard to judge just by looking at a single grade in a class. So these are just some strategies in terms of recruitment. Jaclyn and I were hoping that we could open up the floor to a little bit of a conversation about this. And we threw together some discussion prompts. I'll let Jaclyn introduce these, and then we're going to open it up.
So, so we've thought about a couple of ways to talk about these issues, and we would love to hear more from what everyone is already doing, or about what everyone is already doing. So how do you recruit UTAs? Does your department use a centralized application or a more informal approach? I know for us, we use a more informal approach. We try to also identify students that we feel like would be good in these roles, and hopefully also try to do that in a way that allows for or ensures really equity, diversity as well, and inclusivity. And then when you think of the most effective UTAs you've worked with, I love this question. Erica wrote it. What traits or behaviors made them stand out? And I was reading this earlier again and going, oh my gosh, yeah, I was trying to think about an answer for myself too here. And for me, it was always whenever they're flexible and adaptable and self-aware. Um, excuse me. Ooh, there we go. Or essentially reflective. Yeah. Like, oh, I did this thing, but it didn't go as well as I thought it was gonna go. Excuse me. And what can I do differently there? And then also, yeah, how do you ensure diversity and inclusion in recruiting and selecting UTAs? So we would love to hear from you all here and what your thoughts are.
I I can comment on the second one
Yeah,
if I
Please.
sure.
if I may. Yeah, so the most effective, I have a few names without naming names, but honestly, the person that I didn't have to tell them that something needs to be done, it was
Yes.
already done. Like they would walk in, they would get the models out, they spread out the keys. Whereas others, I've seen them texting until I would say, "Come on, let's move, let's do this." So that's
Yeah.
the one. It's sort of like, yeah, the name. I have a quote, so my English is now rusty.
No, no. I no, you're totally right. I think like they're
Initiative.
self-starters, right? Like
Yeah,
they're
yeah,
self-starters. They know how to anticipate needs and how to get things done by just, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're proactive. Thanks, John.
proactive. Yeah, that's the word. Proactive has initiative.
Yeah, any other qualities or ways that folks approach recruitment? How do you, do students come to you sometimes? That's one of my questions too. Do you have a lot of students asking about UTA positions? Because we also do. We get a lot of students saying, is there this possibility or opportunity here? How does this happen? Um, or we hear about it when they get a position in another department and they're very proud. I'm going to UTA. So,
I'll
oh,
I'll say like I'm now having a bunch because I'm teaching a lecture class, so I have a lot of students saying, "Oh, can I be a UTA for you next semester?" But then I'm worried in the semesters when I'm not teaching, how am I going to recruit? Right? Like it's so easy when I'm right in front of them and I have a big lecture class, so of course I'm going to have that handful or so that comes out, but as soon as
mhm.
I'm not teaching that in-person lecture class, then what?
Yeah, yeah, no, I know it. That makes total sense. So it is really easy whenever you have that contact, especially with that specific group that you need UTAs for, or well, need is a strong word, but you would like to have UTAs working there. Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of keep a running list of students that have shown interest, and then I keep a separate running list of students that I think would make good UTAs. Because for my Foundations of Biology course, I teach it once a year. So I'll have students come up to me all the time in the fall and say, I'm really interested. I'll even talk about it in class and say, if you're interested, let me know. And once I start recruiting for next fall, I'll just automatically send you an application. And then, yeah, as I'm interacting with students across the semester, I kind of keep a list of students that I think, oh, I think you would be really good. And often they aren't the ones that are approaching me.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. Yeah. I mean, and I think, as Erica mentioned too, like there are these students also who don't see themselves in that role, but you see them in that role and how they could be helpful for students who are struggling or how they you feel like they would be really effective, you know, and that's great. That's so great to hear. There's some comments in the chat too. Although Burhan, did you have another comment?
I was just going to agree with you that I often see them as a TA, and when I approach them, you know, they would say, "Okay, keep me in mind for this semester or that semester." And if it happens that their schedule doesn't work out, I make sure that I talk to a colleague who would, you know, place them as a TA in their course.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, it's nice to be able to, right, recommend students in that way too.
Actually, I'll say some of my
Okay.
best UTAs actually came from recommendations from other people. When I started here, I was teaching a class my first semester. I didn't have any former students to pull from, and I got recommendations from people in the department. And honestly, some of them have been the best UTAs. So, and then they stayed with me for 2 or 3 years. So,
Oh, that's always a good feeling. It's always a good feeling when they stay and then, right? And I feel like when you're recommending someone to someone too, you really want to make sure it's good. So it's good. That Philip Rogers says yes, students have come to me to ask about it. So that's good. As far as I know, it is very informal. So a system of coordination and recruitment could be useful. Yeah. And John mentioned in history. Okay. Particularly strong students. Yeah, either ask or are asked. And the same in psychology. Thanks, Christina. Okay, cool. Yeah, I love the idea though to keep a running list. That's great. That makes a lot of sense. Any other questions, comments, concerns, challenges regarding recruitment?
I was thinking I could just add that something I've heard from my colleagues, I'm pretty new to recruiting. And so some of the advice I've gotten is that they actually will um, not or tend to prioritize students who have not been a UTA before, so that we have students who are getting, more students getting the experience. And it was my understanding that most instructors don't have UTAs repeat, at least maybe in my department, that's just become a norm. So it's kind of usually seen as more of a one semester thing.
Oh, that's really interesting. I like that. I like the idea of, right, spreading the opportunity. It also means, does that also mean, Christina, that it's more work though, because you're having to retrain, right, every every semester.
Yeah, I would think
Yeah.
so. This is I'm in my first semester of having UTAs, and I try to keep it small, like one UTA for my large 250 class. But I'm in the process where I have like 15 emails for the spring, and I'm like thinking, okay, how many can I take on? And yes, I'm gonna have to train them and do that every semester if I'm doing 3 or 4 at a time.
Yeah, so I mean, it does make a lot of sense. Erica and I have been talking about, okay, what kind of, how can we come up with maybe materials for training so that folks aren't, having to do this work again and again and again across the university, right? That maybe there's some discipline specific materials, but also other materials that we could have available. So that's on slide 9 though. So I will let Erica come back and take over for slide 8 though.
Yeah, that's a great transition into from recruitment to training. And Christina, the way that you're describing your approach sounds really great and is exactly how I approached it too, starting small, right? You can't suddenly hire 24 UTAs in one semester for your first time doing it, right? But slowly building that team. And I like the idea of maximizing the number of students that get the opportunity. I also think there are huge benefits to having students come back and TA multiple times because then you get that expertise, especially in the department. If they're now taking upper level classes, say in psychology, it helps create that sort of departmental culture and community. So I think there's benefits to both approaches, right? Or having a mix. But yeah, so we wanted to spend the last part of today's workshop talking about UTA training strategies. And again, we're going to sort of model this after how we did it with recruitment. I'll share some of my tips, and then we're going to open the floor to see what you all are already doing and also think about what sort of resources would be valuable at the school level. So in terms of UTA training strategies, I think it's really important that we're holding regular meetings with our UTAs throughout the semester to monitor progress. I think one of the biggest challenges when it comes to taking on UTAs is scheduling. So for me, I put the weekly meeting time in the application, and students have to be available for that time to apply. And so a lot of times I'll have great applicants that can't make the weekly meeting, and I say, it's like registering for a class, right? This is the time you have to be present for, and if you can't, then this is not the semester for you to TA, right? We can talk about it for a future semester. But for me, being available for that meeting is really important because that's the way that I can connect with my UTAs regularly. Defining roles for your UTAs at the beginning of the semester. I know some folks use things like a contract where they outline specifically what the expectations are, but having that conversation in week 1 is really important, right? What are you expected to do, down to, what classes are you supposed to be at? What are you supposed to be doing during that class? How are you a role model during class for other students, right? So even as little as having the conversation about, you should be focused on the lecture because you are modeling to other students what a student should be doing in the classroom rather than watching soccer on your computer, right? So what does that role actually look like to be the most effective? I think goal setting can be really important, especially since we're, rebranding this as an opportunity for the undergraduates and the development of these professional skills. And so having a conversation early on about what those goals might look like. And so let's say at the beginning of the semester, you have your UTA set specific goals for themselves, and then you have them reflect on those goals as you move through the semester. So Burhan had mentioned earlier that you get a lot of recommendation letter requests. And so that's how I sort of use the goal setting of, I know as UTAs, you're going to be asking me for a letter probably for medical school or graduate school. And so, that letter can look different ways. I can either just say, you were a UTA for me and you met these expectations, or you were a UTA for me and you exceeded these expectations by doing X, Y, and Z. And so I'll have the students sort of set goals for what that X, Y, and Z might look like for them. And then at the end of the semester, write a reflection on here's what I did, right? Here's how I met the expectations, and here's something that I contributed as an individual to this program that I think sets me apart, right? And so I end up with these really wonderful reflections where they're telling me about these professional skills that they've gained, and then I can use those reflections in the recommendation letters that I write. So I think it's valuable for the students, also valuable for me. Scenarios I think are really helpful. So if anybody is looking for resources, I do have a list of prepared training scenarios where the students are given a particular scenario. So for example, something around integrity where they're at an office hour and a student comes and is begging them to give them the answers to a homework assignment, right? What do you do in that circumstance, right? And having the students sort of role play how they would interact with that student in that scenario. Using that weekly meeting time to review course content, anything that might be challenging for students, any sort of sensitive topics that you want to make sure your UTAs are prepared to handle with students. It's important that you're having those conversations with your UTAs before they have this conversations with the students. This gets back to the idea of having UTAs that TA for you more than one semester, right? That if you have UTAs that have been around for a couple of years, they can serve as mentors for newer incoming UTAs. And so you can even have a tiered program within your UTA group where newer UTAs are mentored by more senior UTAs. And then the other thing I think that can be really valuable is spending some time and effort helping to cultivate a UTA community, right? Opening lines of communication between UTAs, encouraging that they talk to each other when they have issues or if they, need support in any way so that they actually become friends and they can contact each other and they create a community that they feel like they're a part of, which I think then enhances their effectiveness in the classroom community as well, because they're all on the same page also. So one of the things we've been thinking a lot about is sort of how are departments approaching training. So in bio, for example, we do have a UTA training module that's on Canvas that has like a series of videos that students that are UTAing for anyone can participate in, and it's available to any instructor. But we also, I think, independently do a lot of this training on our own as instructors. And so I'd say there's a lot that's on the individual level with some resources provided at the departmental level. And so my question for folks from other departments is sort of how does your department handle UTA training? And I think for the sake of time, since we are approaching the end of the session, I might also lump that in with our kind of next set of questions as well, just to kind of get the conversation going for the last few minutes here. Given what your department's already doing and what you have already been doing, we're wondering if there's interest in the development of sort of a Dietrich School shared resource, right? A repository where those of us that have developed these materials can deposit those to be shared more widely, and also possibly a committee could do some of this work to build up a repository that could be useful across disciplines. And so we wanted to get your feedback on that as a potential resource for the future, and something that maybe if there's a need for, it's something that Jaclyn and I are interested in and would be interested in helping to build. So I will open up the floor. Yeah, Philip, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for all of these ideas. I'll be really brief because I really want to hear from other people. One of the reasons I'm here is that linguistics doesn't have any formal training for UTAs, and that's going to be tasked to me in the spring and going forward. And the idea that I had was something similar to what we do with our internship program with another faculty member, where there's sort of like bi-weekly meetings throughout the semester. If you're enrolled as a UTA, you participate in that sort of mini class where you're coming to those regular meetings, and that training is part of those meetings, but then also serving as that sort of middleman between the instructor of the course and the student if there are issues about, what the students being asked to do things that they're not supposed to be, or so being someone who can train the students, but also be there on their behalf to sort of intermediate when necessary. Shared materials is exactly something I'm looking for here. If other departments are doing something similar in terms of like a small course or something like that, please, anyone here, reach out to me or keep me in the loop with these things, and I'd be happy to share materials and also be a part of those continuing conversations. So.
I think I'll just jump in and thank Erica and Jaclyn for this incredible presentation. And as I'm listening to this, I definitely echo the need for a Dietrich level involvement on this. I think I would just throw it out that this would definitely be department level conversations. I see that this is very common in the sciences, less so in the humanities, and obviously not in the arts at all. And I think talking to your department, seeing what resources are already available, and also for the trainings for the graduate TAs. So they do undergo some kind of 1 credit, I'm sure, and maybe there's a way to just build, half of a module or something for the undergraduates. And the way that I'm approaching this is definitely experiential learning. I mean, this is professionalization for undergraduates. And I know there was something about said about payment or employment for UTAs. We definitely encourage the credit module. This is something more feasible for your departments. So depending on how many times a student is taking this UTA option, just to negotiate how much credit they're getting for all of this. All right, so thank you everybody for this. And Erica, back to you.
Other comments about what departments are doing, or any it sounds like I've got some interest in a Dietrich-wide resource.
Yeah, there's some folks were definitely interested in the shared materials possibility. And I don't know the DBSERC training.
The DBCERC, yes. That's the Discipline-Based Science Education Research Center, does like a STEM UTA training. I've sent my UTAs to it multiple times. I think it's decent. It's a one-time thing at the beginning of the semester. It's great for onboarding, but it's very science focused.
I see.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Barani. Yeah, no, I wonder if yeah, having a repository of sorts, also to see what other contracts look like, to be able to then tailor your own, especially, you know, someone like Philip who is looking at building, right? What does this course look like? Already having materials to work from and say, okay, even if these materials aren't for linguistics or for, right, they're for the sciences, how, you know, how useful are these for me as well? Because in some cases, I'm sure they are. Especially when we're talking about general classroom dynamics or UTA responsibilities or yeah, kind of setting up boundaries.
I just shared in the chat real quick the training scenarios that I use. So if anybody is looking for doing some like scenario-based training, you're welcome to adapt these. I think a lot of them are, again, STEM focused, but I think that they could easily be adapted for a different context. So if you're trying to create something for the spring, this might be something you could start with.
Thanks for sharing those. They're so great. They're really cool.
All right.
Yeah.
So, again, I want to thank everybody for coming. And, I think this is still an open conversation. Jaclyn and I are very passionate about UTAs and helping faculty to actually use them and to build these programs. And so we want to be a resource and help develop these resources. In the meantime, if there's anything in particular that you're looking for, if you need like a copy of an application or you're looking for contracts that people use, please feel free to email. I know at least in bio, we have a ton of these resources that I think could be adapted to other contexts. So feel free to reach out, and I'm happy to provide anything I can as we work to figure out how to develop something a little bit more substantial.
Yeah, thank you for everyone for being here too. And for all of the ideas today and feedback. It's good. Questions are always good. You guys had us thinking for the past 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Thank you. This was really helpful.
Thanks for coming and sharing.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you again.
All right, y'all. Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Looks like we're
you.
approaching 4 o'clock, so if there's nothing else,
Take care.
take care, everyone.